supposed to be two people here today. One is Matthew Cox and the other is me. Matthew is the director of an organisation called Logan Together. A project called Logan Together, but fortunately he's being called to Canberra, and when you get called to Canberra and you're doing what he does, you go. So he sends his apologies. And unfortunately for me, Matthew sent me some slides that he would like me to, well, that he was going to talk to, and he would do a much better job of that, but I'm going to take you through his component of it, and then I'll get into my component of it after that. Where I'll start with Logan Together. Is anyone in the room familiar with Logan Together? Wow, that's good numbers. Good on you. So Logan Together is a collective impact project, and is anyone in the room familiar with collective impact? Very good. So collective impact is, I think it's key to a lot of the things everyone's been talking about today. It recognises that the way to get to the solution of some of these problems is to bring the people closest to the problem and the solution together in more meaningful and more powerful ways. So collective impact sees shared authority and power between government, the sector and the community, and it looks in particular at giving the community a lot more authority in the co-design, authority in identifying the problems and how they'd like to see the solutions addressed. And Matthew's leading that project down at Logan Together. What he would normally, and the interesting thing about Logan Together also, before I go into some of his slides, for me, is that it's the one time I've seen federal government funding, state government funding, local government funding, sector funding, philanthropic funding, and community energy all around one project. And the project is, strangely enough, something that doesn't deliver any overnight benefits. It's basically an intergenerational anti-poverty project. And that's not the sort of thing that wets a whole lot of whistles in the community when so many other things to do. On the ground though, it's a child development project, and that's where we've been able to have find a whole lot of energy in the community. So essentially, if we're going to talk numbers, and Matthew's great at talking, what he would say is that right now, against a whole lot of measures, there are a whole lot of kids in Logan that could be doing better. And right now, as of 2015, there were 14,000 kids 0 to 8 with a developmental vulnerability. By 2025, we want to get that to 9,000. So that's 5,000 kids doing better, as he would talk about it. And at a policy level or at a government level, there's all sorts of savings. On the ground, that's a saving of $110 million a year they're looking at. And there's economists have won Nobel Prizes in terms of identifying if we spend the right money on the right things in that 0 to 8 stage, the money we save in everything from the criminal justice system to adult education and other problems as people get older is worth winning a Nobel Prize for. Very, very loosely speaking, we operate from -9 months to 8 years old. As I said, it's a child development process, and it looks at everything from healthy habits during pregnancy right through to school attendance. And Logan Together has this, and this is the sort of slide that Matthew really loves, that I really hate, because it has so much on it. But that's essentially their plan on a page, and that talks about everything from the numbers in each of those areas that we need to change to deliver on some of those statistics that we're looking at, all the way through to some of the things that aren't age and stage related. As you can see, there's a big age and stage related approach to the process. But there's a lot of work that's done in effective systems. And it's interesting just listening to some of the conversations this morning. There's a few people in the room who are very interested in systems and system reform as part of this journey towards positive change. And that's one of the reasons he's in Canberra today, because what's happening at Logan Together is starting to really get the attention of people who are making policy decisions all over the place. And watch this space for more place-based solutions to emerge out of some of the decision-making centres in the country. So that's Matthew's bit. Now it's my bit. So Sharon asked me to speak about connecting with a value and not a key message. And it's interesting, a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about now Joan also talked about in one way or another. Fortunately, we don't cross over with too much of it, or we see it from slightly different perspectives. So I'll give you plenty to talk about in the break. I guess the first place to start, though, is what a key message is and what a value is. I look at a key message and I say it's what's important to the people in this room, people like us. So all the people who've got a whiteboard love key messages. All the people who think words are going to solve the problems have got key messages and find them important. A value is what's important to them. It's what they have to, so Logan Together, intergenerational anti-poverty program. How do I give my kid its best start? So they're the two aspects. So one is, what's the key message? It's what's important to us, the people in this room. What's important to them is a value. And the question that was asked earlier about, okay, well, we've got all these different things to deal with. One of the things that Matthew talks about down in Logan is the meteorite shower of policies, programs, and promotion that all the people in Logan have to deal with. And, you know, it's the one person can be getting talked to about their obesity, their homelessness, their drug dependency, their family and domestic violence, their housing issue, all those things. And everyone's got a caseworker, and those caseworkers are assigned for 4 to 12 weeks or whatever it is, and they might have 4 caseworkers across 4 different things. And so we're all focusing on Matthew's problem instead of how to make Matthew thrive. And as a result, I hope he doesn't mind me talking about it like that. But as a result of that, on any given day, there's a whole lot of key messages, programs, policy that are all hitting the same people at the same time. I think that is an incredible challenge for us because everybody's got self-interest, and there's that meteorite shower of what I'm talking about today, key messages, isn't going to end. What that translates to in terms of a television commercial or a communication campaign usually ends up with a whole lot of intent, but a need to cram some key messages into it as well. I'll give you an example from a few years back. Oh, do I have to?
Hey guys, where's the birthday girl?
Good, mate. Cheers. 3 beers, 2 vodka and tonics. G'day, car, Mick. Sorry, buddy. Right, mate? Easy. You want some, mate? Yeah.
Don't turn a night out into a nightmare.
Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
That ad drives me mad for a whole lot of reasons. One, as opposed to the ad Joe showed you before, where there was, okay, well, what can you do about it? Okay, help your mate, interfere in that way. What's the replacement behaviour there? But more importantly, how many young people care how many young Australians get bashed each week? Or they see that every week and nothing changes. So, but we've crammed a couple of key messages into it because when the research was done, there was a whole lot of things that people weren't getting out of it. Well, you're not shocking us enough. It wasn't violent enough. Show everyone getting beaten up. And but we need them to know about, you know, all the other things. So that sort of thing is as I see it, very unhelpful. But if we know, we can, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So in terms of connecting a value to a value rather than a key message, if you get it right, there's the opportunity to save money, build trust, grow advocacy, mobilise communities, but it involves, to me, working outside of a whole lot of the existing conventions that we currently work within. We're going to talk about that now. I'm going to do that by talking a little bit about what we're up against and what it looks like, some tools for connecting, and what that looks like in Logan. Okay, what we're up against. What we're up against is a funding model and funders who work within a whole lot of constraints and conflicted motivations. And whether that's government or people funded by government or people scared of government or scared by government or what government will do if they say things a certain way, the reality is that there's a whole lot of constraints and conflicted motivations. And while that happens, whilst the whole lot of people are trying to do the right thing, whilst we try to work within that, we're not going to get around it. And I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. So I'm just very briefly going to touch on a typical funded cycle, some fear-based marketing, key messages to tick some boxes, some stakeholder limitations, and a focus on the wrong sort of research. Okay, this is a typical funded cycle as we have been exposed to over the years. Year one, lots of fireworks. We're doing something in answer to a question about what's the government doing. Year two, it's about half the spend because year one cost a lot. By year three, we're doing social media because we were only funded for 3 years. By year four, there's some new thinking or a new government or a new minister or whatever's happening. And what we did in the first couple of years didn't really work that well anyway, or we've got a different perspective, and then we start again. And in amongst all of that, somewhere in that year four part, Samir put up a slide before about, I can't even remember, but it drove me crazy looking at it. It was, illumination. What were those ones? There was illumination, there was incubation. So that's all got to be done in year four before we start getting it wrong for the next 4 years. Then there's fear-based marketing. Have a look at this one. Sydney Music Festival deaths. 2 young people dead. 2 pills contain deadly substance. Death, deadly, dead. Minister, what are you doing about all the people dying at festivals? Well, we're going to run an awareness campaign and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. The amount of times we have acted or been asked to act around initiatives that are there for nothing more than a fear of not being seen to be doing enough, I'd hate to count. But that's the fear-based marketing. While we're doing that, we're motivated by the wrong things. Key messages. Key messages. These aren't even key messages. These are slogans, but there's no excuse for abuse. Every K over is a killer. Be alert, not alarmed. Don't let the game play you. 1 in 5 Australians, blah, blah, blah. And it just goes on. And so that's what everyone in this room is dealing with. At any given day, there's a whole lot of people down in Logan, as we sit, that are being exposed to all this. And that doesn't even cover their obesity or family and domestic violence or all the other things that we're charged with addressing. Oh, and just on that one, I ran up to my desk before because I'm very forgetful, or up to my seat. This is just an excerpt from a document that I received recently from a client. And it says, a suite of key messages, attachment A, has been developed across a range of topics to excite and inform. Now, how many suites of key messages have ever excited and informed any of you in this room? And yet that's the world and the bubble we live in. This one here is the limitations of that we work with, our stakeholder limitations. So there's nothing kills a concept like being told you've got to have every ethnicity in your ad. Nothing kills a concept like being told you've got to have sun hats on everyone. Try talking to a young mum in Logan where there's 6 different ethnicities all wearing sun hats and say that, yes, we understand the challenges that are going on in your life. And yet every government ad has that. We've been in situations where there's been a report that's come out and the report has been around, something nasty, child abuse. I think it was around that. And there was a need to run an ad that basically said we're doing something about it, and the report is going to open everyone's eyes to it. But the report came out today, and we want to be in Saturday's paper, and it's Thursday. What can you do? So we ended up finding a nice stock shot of just a little kid walking off into the future with an adult, and it just said something, about going into the future together or whatever it was, and they said, that's great, thanks. Then we get a phone call later from the Parliament and Premier and Cabinet said the kid's not wearing a sun hat. So that's what you're up against. And so what I say is there's a whole lot of limitations and I guess conflicted motivations that exist that make it very hard for government to do anything good in this space when it comes to communication. Another bugbear of mine is research that is either done for the wrong reasons or doesn't solve any of the problems that we're trying to address. An example of that is I've redacted anything to remove incriminate anyone or offend anybody. This is an actual document, okay? And I'm just going to take you through some of the key points. There is a clear indication that the target markets would reject the humorous feel cartoon characters. So start to think of what that means in terms of what the creative is going to be. Rather, the campaign executions and overall style of the campaign need to be serious, commanding respect, credible, and having integrity without being condescending. Consideration to a respected male like a father figure may be effective here. So start to think of what that means the ad's going to look like. The message needs to be informative without overload, but it's difficult to recommend one single campaign message. So then we end up, well, let's put a couple of supers in the ad like they did in that drinking ad. Shock tactics with real case studies of the effects appear to resonate the strongest amongst the target audiences. The amount of focus groups that I have seen where people have been presented a concept and they said, yeah, I really like that. And then the researcher says, what's wrong with the ad? And then before you know it, you go into all the deficits. And before you know it, people are saying, if it's problem gambling, show the effects on the kids. If it's drinking, show people getting bashed up. And all you're doing is then saying, okay, this is what everybody says they want. We better give it to them. But the reality is you're not taking anyone anywhere when you do that because that's their lived reality anyway. But what that does is that covers a whole lot of bottoms in a whole lot of places because if you do something risky and somebody comes out and says, you didn't have sun hats in that ad, no, did you do any research? This is the one that where everyone say, yeah, we did research, we tested it. So there are some limitations that we're working with here. Some tools for connecting. And as Joan said, it's about what's important to them rather than what's important to us. And that starts with why. And I'm just going to show you an ad that has no key messages, connects to a value. It's my favourite ad ever for a whole lot of reasons. And actually, it's a message that can resonate with a whole lot of people in here too, I would imagine.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Okay, so that was from an ad from Apple back in the days where people were only interested in computers, RAM, ROM, size, screens, all that sort of stuff. No product benefits whatsoever in there, no product specifics, just a value. If you think that the status quo deserves to be changed, then chances are you'll be the sort of person that will value the things that we're bringing to market. So that was all about it starting with why. So, I guess one of the things that a lot of the schemers will work within in terms of what's the problem, and that to me that is incredibly important. But that's the same problem has got most probably got a whole lot of comorbidities and personal perspectives brought to it. So to me, it all starts with why. We've got to get to the problem. But why will people believe us? Why will they give us permission to talk to them? Why will they act on the advice or the recommendations that we're providing? So then the other one is listening to understand. And I think there's two types of listening. And again, in the advertising game, we're very guilty of listening to respond. The government needs this, the government needs us to do this, or this client needs us to do this, we need to do it. Listening to understand is a completely different exercise. Listening to understand throws out a whole lot of traditional perspectives around research, proving hypotheses, doing any of that sort of stuff. It says, let's just go out and listen to what people are saying. Let's hear their lived realities. Let's ask some questions without anything to prove other than to find out. And I was fortunate enough to spend a week last year in Washington, DC at a place called the Harvard Institute. And the Harvard Institute, fantastic place. If any of you get an opportunity to go, spend a week there, they talk, it's all about community engagement, citizen engagement, and essentially what they talk about is having community conversations. And community conversations, teaching people in the community to basically convene groups and bring the authority in the room down to the people in the room, rather than there being a paid professional in the room who can actually ask the questions. And that's one of the things that Logan Together is doing brilliantly at the moment, is training up people in the community to go out and conduct community conversations. I'm going to show you some of the results of some of that work in a second. The difference when you start to listen to understand rather than listen to respond, listening to respond will make sure you've got your key messages, all the things that the research is telling you, the government stakeholders are telling you, everything's telling you. Listening to respond ends up connecting with a value or what's important to the people you're talking to. The other thing, so Harvard talk about two types of knowledge, expert knowledge and public knowledge. We'd like to add a third one into that, which is practitioner knowledge. And so expert knowledge is what the textbooks tell us, what the research tells us, what our experts tell us, what our agencies and consultants tell us. And a lot of people in the room would be full of expert knowledge or exposed to or have access to expert knowledge. Practitioner knowledge is what's worked to date, what hasn't, the boundaries we work within, external threats, internal threats. So the experts are telling us this, but we'll never have the budget to do that. Or, you know, my director is never going to let me do some of that stuff, or whatever those limitations are. And then public knowledge is what the public knows to be true. Their lived experiences, our peer influences, our realities, what we know, think, and feel about your offering. And the challenge for us is finding that sweet spot. Because when you do that, all the stuff that's important that they don't need to know or don't care about or will never have time to process gets thrown out the window. And it becomes, what's the bit in the expert knowledge that them knowing will change, will help change things. Over in the practitioner knowledge is, there's a whole lot of things that are vital to us in our dealings, but everyone wins only when we get this bit right. So what's the bit in terms of what you do that can lead to everyone winning? And then public knowledge is simply, before you start, let me tell you about my day. And that goes to the question from the group earlier about, what about when we're bombarding people with hundreds of messages? How does that fit? Because they've got some terms of engaging with us. And the first thing we've got to be able to do is connect with something that's important to them. So when we think about that sort of thing, we don't think about the execution. We think about what's going to connect. And then the execution. Sometimes you have to be assertive with your messaging. Other times you can be very empathic. You know, you don't think executionally until you've got to this point. So it's about connecting with what's important to them rather than what's important to us. And then finally, what that looks like in Logan is a little project or a campaign that we're calling the early years. And around that, the thing about what we're doing at Logan Together, it is the antithesis of all those things that we've been talking about today. And I'll take you through that. We're going to talk quickly about the challenge, the solution, some learnings, and rolling it out. So the challenge, how do we create a campaign that resonates across 217 cultures, speaking as many as 168 languages, and often little or no English, and do it in a way that avoids the issues of diversity, political correctness, blame, and the stigmas often associated with the issues Logan Together addresses? So that was the challenge that we were addressing. The early years was the knowledge sweet spot that we arrived at. Because the early years allowed us to focus on the one thing that we know is important to all parents, giving a kid a great start in life. So it wasn't about Logan, it wasn't about them as parents, it wasn't about any of the deficits. And it gave us an opportunity to connect with people in a way that wasn't going to stigmatise, judge, or send out a whole lot of key messages. What we did was we actually used we decided to take some symbols from early life, the young chicken, the young ducklings, and we wanted to show them and all their natural nurturing tendencies and cross that over into the human experience. And what that avoided straight away was no sun hats, no, why have you only got Indigenous kids in this ad, or why aren't there any Tongan kids, or hold on, what about all the Arab kids, and why aren't there any white kids? So none of that, just little chickens. We haven't had one person come to us and complain about the colour of the chicken yet. And so what that allows is it allows us to get straight to some of the things that people want to connect with rather than what some of the things they want to find fault with. So then we got into, and we said, this is great. We can do the early years in reading. We can do the early years in kindy. We can do the early years in prep and nutrition and exercise and all that, and sun hats, all that sort of stuff. And we decided we'd do a typical campaign approach. And what that led to, and then through some community listening, what happened was they said, no, that's exactly what we don't need. No, we've been hearing that what people need is they need some tools to get into kindy and to get to more kids getting into prep properly. And so the first thing we did was at a fete, we just produced a little checklist for people to go around to all the booths where all the suppliers were, making sure they asked all the questions they needed. That then then from that we said, we've got to grow this from the ground up. So we started in year one, start small, build trust, support energy, collaborate, build more trust, grow more energy in year two. By year three, support a movement. So the complete opposite of what we've been talking about earlier is what we're trying to do at Logan Together. And the great thing about that is you can take people with them. Nothing top down, all bottom up, community being mobilised. And that leads to things like this. People from the community coming to us and saying, hey, we've got this idea for how to get people into prep better, but we're really crap at doing it. So we say, okay, we'll turn into that. And all of a sudden we've had people from schools outside of Cairns asking us for these posters. There's schools are calling us up. And there's something interesting in this that I've got to try and read for you, and I don't know how I'm going to do that. So bear with me while I come over here, hop on the ground. I just want to read you the small type at the bottom of this thing. It says, thousands of people put Logan together, so putting everyone's logos here doesn't work. But you can find them at logantogether.org.au. Have a look and maybe give one of them a call to say thanks. So there's no Queensland government, no federal government, no. And you know why we do that? Because in collective impact, it's government, sector, and the individual, the community. What's the community's logo look like? So while we're putting everyone else's logos on and we're supposed to be collective impact, if we don't represent the community, we're just going back to old ways. So I've talked too much, so I've just got to keep going now. So that ended up being tools that you can have a conversation over. And it led us to being able to talk about kindy in all sorts of ways. It led us to interesting sponsorships. What we ended up doing was, rather than spending a whole lot of money on mass media campaigns, we sponsored the local faith groups' Christmas carols, but not as Logan Together or the early years, but as kindy. This booklet proudly brought to you by kindy. And out of that, we had a whole lot of people who, from cultures and that would normally say our kids aren't going to kindy, being exposed to kindy in ways and within a framework and a medium that they trust. Next, we're looking at maternity. And at the end of the day, we're trying to connect with a value rather than a set of key messages. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions for him? Quick.
Yes.
Can you give him the...
don't know if you can tell us this or not, but what was the campaign that you came up with that very long brief with the father figure, you can't have this, it's got to be fear appeals? What did you come up with?
That wasn't us. That was just some research that I saw from government. But, but can I tell you, that could have been any campaign.
Yeah.
It could have been any campaign from a night out to electrical safety to on the beach to in a car. It's everywhere, and it's being a slave to the things that are pretty much fear-based. If we do all the things the research told us, we won't get into trouble. And how often, I used to work in Sydney at a big multinational agency, head office for their client was Racine, Wisconsin. We used to have to do 3 concepts for every product, and didn't matter which one we liked, whichever one researched the best, we had to go with. And that was because our client could then say back to Racine, don't blame us, we went with the one that researched best. So that's the challenge. Joan.
I think I would totally agree that if you just ask people what they like or don't like, you can certainly get the wrong steer when you do your research. And if you are literally interpreting, all the things that are wrong with something and putting that in a page and then making assumptions based on that, definitely I can see how you can get those kind of briefs. But I would just also point out that there are researchers who do understand how to change behaviour and who ask questions that do actually inform positive, benefits-based communication, such as the one that you showed as good practice.
Yes, but you know what I'd say to that? Yeah. I wasn't bagging research. I was banging the wrong type of research, and unfortunately, the wrong type of research feeds into the conflicted motivation that sits within a whole lot of funded organisations, which is fear-based. If we don't do this, if we don't do what's being asked in the research, to me, in the research, if somebody said to me, "What do you think about that ad?" and I said, "I really like it," I say, "Great, thanks. That's all we need to know." Or what do you take out of that ad? Well, what I take out of it is this. Great, thanks. I would never say, "What's wrong with it?" And I hear that all the time. Well, how could it be improved? So you've got all these experts that have already done all the thinking and now are saying to a whole lot of people who frankly aren't qualified to say how the ad could be improved creatively. If we did that, if we did those things, people would say, around maternity. And I had this with the maternity. They said, you can't have ducks and birds promoting maternity because they aren't mammals, and when we want to do messages around breastfeeding, they won't be able to, they don't breastfeed. So when we want to do messages around breastfeeding, and I said, they don't go to school or kindy either. You've got to suspend your disbelief on some of these things, and it gives you permission to go into all sorts of things if you cut to the humanity. And the thing about that is there's a whole lot more humanity in ducks and little birds and the connection the messages that we're leading with those, than there is in showing a whole lot of kids with sun hats across 6 different ethnicities. And so to me, one of the keys to it is how do we get to the humanity in our communication? No humanity in that everyone bashing each other in a bar scene. All that is repeating to people some lived experiences.